We continue now at the top of Daf Samach Gimel Amud Beis in Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma Daf 63b. On the previous Amud, the Gemara is darshaning various parts of the Psukim by Kefil, and so the pasuk says, what does it come to include when it says Al Kol Aveda? Ba'Aveda Mishalim Tashlumei Kefil. It's talking about a Shomer Aveda. Let's say a person finds a lost object. Now he's a Shomer over that lost object. So if he would be Toin Tainas Ganav in that situation, claim he's not responsible because it was stolen from him, he would pay Kefil if he was lying. Shenemar, as it says, Al Kol Aveda Asher Yomar. Again, it says in the pasuk Al Kol Aveda. And Rashi explains, Ba'Aveda Motze Aveda. Again, somebody finds an Aveda. Shetoin Nignev Vahemeni La'achar Shemitzasiya. He says it was stolen from me after I found it. Again, in that situation, there would be a payment of kefil if it turned out that it wasn't actually stolen from the person. And the Gemara continues, Tanan Hasam, we learned in the Mishnah over there, Heichon Pikdoni, the person says, where's my pikadon, where's the item that I deposited by you? Amar Lei said to him, Avad, he said it was lost. Mashbiachani, so the person says, I want you to take an oath about that. V'yomar Amen, and the person says, Amen. V'a'edem mi'edem oso sha'achlo, but then the Edom testify that actually it was him. The person himself consumed the item. It wasn't actually lost. Mishalim es ha-keren, in that situation he has to pay the keren. He has to pay for the principal. This is not a case of Toin Tainas Ganev. He's claiming not that it was stolen from him, he's claiming that it was lost, and therefore there's no kefil in that case. He just pays for the item. Now, Hoda al Piatzmo, let's say he admits himself that he actually was the one that took the item, that consumed the item, so then already he took an oath that it was really lost, and then he admits that he was lying. So in that case, Mishalim Keren v'chomesh v'yasham, that's the case where the person has to pay not only the principal, he also has to pay an added fifth, and he has to bring a carbon asham. And Rashi says, Hoda me'atzma Mishalim Keren v'chomesh v'yasham. If he admits again, he has to pay Keren, Chomesh, and Asham. And Rashi says, D'chsiv, as it's written, O Mikol Asher Yishava Olav Lasheker. Again, he takes this false oath. V'zeu Asham Gazelus. This is what we call the Asham Gazelus. Ve'eno ba'ela al hoda aspiv. It only comes if the person admits after. Di'ava b'delo kasa bi parsha hoda. Now, even though it doesn't say in that section an idea of admitting, Kasav Rachmana ba'asham gezel hager b'parshas na. So it does say it by the Asham, the gezel hager. It says that language. V'ezvadu es chatasim. It talks about admitting. V'chomesh na Eno below Asham, and the Chomesh is only paid when there's an Asham. So since we know the Asham is only by Hoda, the Chomesh as well is only by Hoda. And the Gemara continues, Heichon Pikdoni. This again is the Mishnah from later on. So let's say the person says, where's my Pikadon? Amar lo, he says Nignav. Now he claims it was stolen. In this case, it is Toin Tainas Ganav. Mashbiachani, he says take an oath that it was stolen. V'yamar Amen, he says Amen, he takes the oath. V'idem mi'idem oso shaganvo, and the Edom testify that actually he's the one that stole it. Mishalim tashlumei kefil. So then he does pay kefil. That's the case of Toin Tainas Ganav. Hoda me'atzma, if he admits, again, Mishalim Keren v'chomesh v'yosham, he's going to pay the Keren and the Chomesh and the Yosham like we said above. And the Gemara says, Katani miha, nevertheless, what does it say over here? B'toin Tainas Ganev, the Mishalim Tashlumei Kefil. It says that if he's Toin Tainas Ganev, so then he pays Kefil. Aval B'toin Tainas Avad, but if he claims that it was lost, Lo Mishalim Tashlumei Kefil. Again, like we said above, he doesn't pay Kefil. V'afilu Toin Tainas Ganev, and even by a case of Toin Tainas Ganev, B'shvuhu the Mishalim Tashlumei Kefil. It's only if he takes an oath to that effect that he pays Kefil. Aval Shalo B'shvuhu, but if there's no oath, Eino Mishalim Tashlumei Kefil, then we see from this Mishnah that he doesn't pay Kefil. And so the Gemara says, Menohani Mili, from where do we know this? And the Gemara says, the Tonu Rabbanon, because the rabbis taught, Im Yimotze HaGanav, the Pasuk says, if the Ganav is found. And we'll take a look at the full context of the Psukim. The Pasuk says, Ki yiten ish al re'eu kesef o kelim lishmor. It says, if a person gives a pikadon to someone to watch, v'gunav mi beis ish, and it's stolen, Im Yimotze HaGanav yishalem shnaim. If the Ganav is found, you pay shnaim, you pay kefil. It mentions kefil over here. And then the Pasuk goes on to say, Im lo Yimotze HaGanav, if the Ganav is not found, v'nikra balabayas el elokim lo sholach yodim lechs re'eu. So then the balabayas brings him to the court. He has to take an oath that he didn't send his hand forth on the pikadon. He didn't take the pikadon. So in any case, the Brisa says, what's this pasuk when it says Yimotze HaGanav? What's it talking about? Who's the one that's paying the kefil? B'toin Tainas Ganav HaKosim Medaber. The Brisa says we're talking here about a Toin Tainas Ganav paying kefil. The Gemara says, Ato Omer B'toin Tainas Ganav. Is it really talking about Toin Tainas Ganav? Oeno Ela B'Ganav Atzmo. Maybe this pasuk is talking about the Ganav himself who's found that's paying kefil. And the Gemara says to that, Kishu Omer Im Lo Yimotze HaGanav. When the pasuk goes on, the second pasuk goes on to say Im Lo Yimotze HaGanav. Clearly there is no Ganav. B'toin Tainas Ganav HaKosim medaber. Clearly, it's talking about toin tainas ganav, and again, it's saying that toin tainas ganav pays kefil specifically in a situation of shavua. And the Gemara continues, Tanya Idach, we learned in another brisa, Im yimotze haganav beganav atzmo hakasa medaber. On the contrary, that first pasuk of if the ganav is found is talking about the ganav himself paying kefil. Atz omer beganav atzmo ve'enu ela betoin tainas ganav. You're saying it's the ganav himself. Maybe it's a case of toin tainas ganav. So in this brisa, kishu omrim lo yimotze haganav, when the pasuk goes on to say in the next pasuk im lo yimotze haganav that the ganav is not found, hare toin tainas ganav omer. That's talking about toin tainas ganav. Hamani mekayim im yimotze haganav. So what does that first pasuk mean? Of him yimatzeh haganav, beganav atzmo hakasa medaber. We're talking about the ganav himself. In other words, there's a contradiction in brises. One brisa says the first pasuk is talking about toin tainas ganav, just like the second pasuk. The other brisa is saying no, they're talking about separate things. The first pasuk is talking about the ganav himself. The second pasuk is talking about toin tainas ganav. The Gemara will ask if they're both talking about toin tainas ganav. Why do you have two psuk? Why do you have to have two psukim about the same thing? But in any case, the Gemara says the kuli alma mias. But everybody agrees im lo yimatzeh haganav that the second pasuk of im lo yimatzeh haganav, where you never found the ganav, but toin tainas ganav ksiv, that's certainly talking about toin tainas ganav. And so the Gemara says, my mashma, how do you know that? Where do you see that in the context of the pasuk? And the Gemara says, Amar Rava says, im lo yimotze kimasha amar, because it's like this: if it's not found that what he said is true, Elashu atzmo ganvo, but rather he himself is the ganav. He claims it was stolen from him. But im lo yimotze haganav, it's not true what he said. He's actually the ganav. Yishalem shnayim. So then he pays double. So you see, toin tainas ganav pays kefel. Uminolan de v'shua. And how do we know that the oath has to be involved in order that a person has to take that false oath in order to pay kefel? So as we said, the Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, v'nikra balabayis el alokim. It says that the balabayis brings him to court. L'shvua. It's talking about an oath over here. Ata omer l'shvua ve'eno l'ledin. You're saying it's an oath, maybe it just means you come to the court. No, nemar shlichas yad lamata. It says shlichas yad below, meaning in another context. V'nemar shlichas yad lamal, and it says shlichas yad above, meaning over here. Mala halan l'shvua, just like over there when it uses the term shlichas yad, it's talking about an oath. Afkan l'shvua, so too over here, it's talking about a shvua, it's talking about an oath. And Rashi explains shlichus yad lamata. It says shlichus yad below, meaning b'shomer sacher. By shomer sacher, it says shvuas Hashem tiyeh bein shneim imlo shalach. It talks about shalach yodo, and it talks about a shvua. And shlichus yad lamala, it says shlichus yad above, meaning over here. V'nikra balabayis el elokim lo shalach yodo. And so again, we understand that that too is talking about an oath. And the Gemara says, B'shlom alaman damar chad beganav v'chad b'toin tainas ganav. Now it makes sense according to the one who says that one of the psukim, the first pasuk, is talking about the ganav himself paying kefil, and the second pasuk is talking about toin tainas ganav. Hainu dechsivi trei kroi. That's why there are two psukim over here talking about two separate things. But according to the one who says both psukim are talking about toin tainas ganav, trei kroi lamali. Why do we need two psukim for? We already mentioned that the Gemara would ask this question, and the Gemara says, Amri, they answer as follows: Chad lemuute tainas avid. One pasuk is excluding. Let's say the person doesn't claim it was stolen from him, but he claims it was lost. In that case, that's excluded. There's no kefil there, and therefore we need that pasuk. That's why we need two psukim. And the Gemara says, but then let's go back to the other man damar. According to the one who says that one pasuk is by a ganav and one's by toin tainas ganav, the lo miyaser. So now you don't have an extra pasuk. So lemute tainas avad menole. So how does that man damar know to exclude tainas avad? How does he know to exclude if the person makes a claim that it was lost? And to that the Gemara says miganav haganav. It could have just said ganav. It says haganav with a hey. That's an exclusion. That excludes tainas avad. And so the Gemara goes back to the other man damar, tarvayu b'toin tainas ganav, demiyadle toin tainas avad. According to the one who says both psukim are by toin tainas ganav, and therefore you have an extra one to exclude toin tainas avad. So ganav haganav my darshbe. So what does that man damar do with the extra hey? Amar loch. So he'll say to you, mi boy leilech Rabbi Yechia bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan. The extra hey is for the teaching of Rabbi Yechia bar Abba that said from Rabbi Yochanan. The Amar Rabbi Yechia bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yechia bar Abba said that Rabbi Yochanan said hatoin tainas ganav b'pikadon. If somebody is toin tainas ganav by a deposit, meshalim tashlumi kefil, he pays kefil. Tavachum machar meshalim tashlumi arba v'chamisha. And if he slaughters it and sells it, we mentioned this above, then he does pay the arba v'chamisha. He does pay the 4 or 5 times the amount, and that is going to be learned from the extra hay. And the Gemara therefore continues, Laman Damar Chad Beganav V'chad B'toin Tainas Ganav. So going back to the other Man Damar, the one who says that one pasuk is by a Ganav and one is by Toin Tainas Ganav, the Hai Ganav Haganav Afke Lemute Tainas Avad, that Man Damar, as we said above, uses the extra hay to exclude Tainas Avad. So the Reb Chia bar Abba Minole, where does he learn the teaching of Reb Chia bar Abba that we just had? And the Gemara says to that, Amar Lach, he'll say to you, Hekeshu, it's actually a comparison. We're comparing Toin Tainas Ganav to the situation of a Ganav, and therefore through the Hekesh, the fact that they're written right next to each other says they're treated exactly the same. Just like by a regular Ganav there's Arba v'chamisha, so too by Toin Tainas Ganav there's Arba v'chamisha, ve'ein meshivan al Hekesh. If you have a Hekesh, two psukim that are written near each other, you can't refute it using logic. And Rashi says, Hekeshu, it's a Hekesh, meaning Kevan desmichi lahadadi hanikroi. Since these two psukim are near each other, Iskish Ganav v'Toin Tainas Ganav lahadadi, so Ganav and Toin Tainas Ganav are compared to one another. Ma Ganav mishalam tashlum Arba v'chamisham tavachu machar, just like a Ganav pays 4 or 5 times the amount if he slaughters or sells. Af Toin Tainas Ganav mishalam Arba v'chamisha. So too, Toin Tainas Ganav pays 4 or 5 times the amount in the same context. Now, even though there's a possible refutation, that when it comes to a Ganav, he pays kefil without a shvua. Tomer b'toin tainas Ganav shetzarach shvua. By a toin tainas Ganav, as we said, there's only kefil when he takes that false shvua. Ein meshivan ala hekesh. You can't refute a hekesh. That's what we mean to say in the Gemara, when the Gemara says that it's a hekesh, and you can't refute it using logic. And the Gemara continues, we can understand, according to the one who says one pasuk is by a Ganav and the other is by Toin Tainas Ganav, it works out. But according to the one who says that both psukim are by Toin Tainas Ganav, Ganav atzmo minole. Where do we know that a Ganav himself? How do we know a Ganav pays kefil if both of these psukim are talking about Toin Tainas Ganav? And the Gemara says to that, now if you're going to say, we should learn it from a kal v'chomer. If a Toin Tainas Ganav, if you claim someone stole it, you pay kefil. Certainly if you're a Ganav, you pay kefil. So bekal v'chomer mi Toin Tainas Ganav, maybe you'll say make a kal v'chomer from Toin Tainas Ganav, but that's not a good kal v'chomer, because dayo lovim and adin lios kanidon, because when you do a kal v'chomer, you can't go beyond the source. And we just said malahalan b'shvua, afkan b'shvua. What do we mean you can't go beyond the source? By Toin Tainas Ganav, there's only kefil with a shvua. So then you would have to say by a Ganav, there's only kefil by a shvua, and that's not true. By a Ganav, there's kefil even if no shvua was taken. So therefore, we're still back to our question: how do you know that a Ganav pays kefil? You can't learn it from Toin Tainas Ganav, because then it would be limited to a situation of a shvua. And the Gemara says, Nafkalei mideh Tana devei Chizkiya. We learn it out from Tana devei Chizkiya. As we'll see in a moment, Tana devei Chizkiya will teach us that a Ganav pays kefil. And the Gemara says, the Tana devei Chizkiya, because it was taught in the yeshiva of Chizkiya, Yomar shor u'geneva v'hakol bechlal. Let it say shor and geneva, and everything will be included. And the Gemara says, Ilukacha yisi yomer. But if it did that, then I would say, Mahaprat mefurish karav l'gavi mizbeach. That which is specified, it's only something that is brought on the mizbeach. Av kol karav l'gavi mizbeach. So too, it has to be only something that is brought on the mizbeach. Ma yesh l'cha lahavi seh. So what else can you include that's brought on the mizbeach? That would be a seh. That would be a sheep. And Rashi explains, mideh Tana devei Chizkiya, we learn from the Tana devei Chizkiya, again, that a Ganav pays kefil. The Darash Krachrina, they darash in a different pasuk. The Mishtoi beganav atzmo, it's talking about a Ganav itself. It says in the pasuk, biyado haganeva. It says if the Ganeva is found in his hand, it talks about Yishalim Shnayim, paying double. And Rashi notes, v'haidanak drasha. Now the reason over here why we're talking about a drasha from that pasuk, when the pasuk seems to say explicitly that there's kefil, v'lo nakat kra, and we don't just say that the pasuk says that, mishum demikra lo nafkal and behedya ela balei chayim, because from the pasuk you really would only see that by balei chayim. If balei chayim are stolen, if animals are stolen, you pay double. Kedechsiv, as it's written in that pasuk, mishor v'yad chamor ad sechayim. It talks about animals. Umidrasha marbelu Tana devei Chizkiya lekulu. It's through the drasha that we're going to include everything. Yomar shor u'geneva v'hakol bechlal. Again, Tana devei Chizkiya said it should say shor and geneva, and everything would be included. The marbin on kol ke'ein haprat. Rashi explains what the Brisa means to say. What the Tana devei Chizkiya means to say is we really would include anything that's similar to the prat, meaning davar hametaltel v'gufo mammon, meaning something that's a movable object that has intrinsic monetary value. And the point is chamor v'seh lamali. Why do we need chamor and seh? You already have. Let it just say shor, and we'll say anything similar to the shor, Like we say, like a klal uprat to klal, anything similar to the prat, we'll say anything similar to a shor, and we'll know to include anything that is gufo mammon and that's metaltel. Why do we need chamor and seh? Umeshani ilukain, and then the Gemara is going to go on to answer. Well, the kamei meforish ma'iko amar. The Gemara will explain this all later on. Halav klalu pradu chlalhu the chadarish leikein haprat. That this is not really a klalu pradu chlal. So why are we darshaning like the prat? It's not really a klalu pradu chlal. In any case, the Gemara then says af kol karev. The Gemara said if we said that, so I would say it has to be something that's brought on the mizbeach. V'lo misrabi michein haprat ela karev lemizbeach. We would think only to include things like the prat that are brought on the mizbeach. Lahachi kosav said. That's why the pasuk says seh. Again, the pasuk says mishur v'yad chamur at sechaim. That's why it says seh. The lotema klal esuye karev lemizbeach. Because you don't say that the klal is including things that are brought only on the mizbeach. The ma'yesh lach lahavi shekarev lemizbeach. Because then what would you include? What other animal is brought on the mizbeach? V'lo nichta beferish that's not written. Seh. You would say it includes a seh that's brought on the mizbeach. But keshu omer seh. But it already says seh in the pasuk. Harei seh omer. So it says seh. Hamani mekayim geneva shani dorish b'chein haprat. So therefore, what are we going to be mekayim from geneva that we say it has to be similar to the prat? It can't be karev l'gam mizbeach, because if we were including that, we don't need to write the word seh. It must be something else. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Dalid Amud Aleph.